This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Law enforcement officers, Bureau of Prison, U.S. Marshals, Customs Border Protection, Homeland Security. Welcome back to our podcast series with financial advisor Joseph Tarpley, where we discuss your benefits, retirement planning needs. So, Joseph, welcome back.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you having me again.
Okay, so when we wrapped up our last session, we teed up today's discussion, which is early retirement. And I know it gets confusing, and this is what you specialize in. So let's get into that. What do you think is so confusing for employees?
Well, just because mostly is law enforcement law enforcement officers have certain stipulations that comes with their retirement, having to retire early, having to pretty much having to take the supplemental annuity, as far as accessing, funds and everything. It can become confusing for individuals when normally, most people kind of have a standard, let's say normal federal employees have a, standard, 62, 20 years at 60, 30, 30 years at 55. So it kind of helps to get a little insight whenever there's a difference in standards, I guess.
Okay, so let me lay out because it is confusing, let's lay out a scenario. So let's say I am a law enforcement officer, and what happens if I reach age 57? I've accrued 20 years of service.
Well, at 57, that is the mandate. It's the mandated age for retirement for law enforcement officers. And at 57, they've designed it, but of course, when things are designed, sometimes it doesn't meet that. But
Right.
for the latest age to be hired is 37, so that when you reach 57, you have your 20 years of service. But what we're seeing, I've spoke with several clients that some of them are not going to have 20 years of service when they reach 57 due to how they were hired. Um, and so, and the way the rules work from the OPM is that it's at 57 or when you reach the 20 years. So the month after you reach 20 years of your service, you will automatically have to retire from a law enforcement position with the federal government.
Hmm. So what happens if I leave federal service before 20 years?
Well, if you, as far as meeting your minimum requirements, for the federal government is 5 years of service, and that time is vested with only uh, service in the federal government. You can't use military time or any kind of leave that you've accrued to reach those 5 years. Um, and that being said, you have access to your FERS annuity. However, there's a reduction that will be taken uh, for what you have up to whenever you haven't received your 20 years. And so if you retire, I had spoke with a client just the other day. He was interested in. He said he'll have his 20 years at 57, but he has 4 years of military service that he bought back. And so he was wondering if there's a possibility that he could retire at say 53. And unfortunately, without the your military time or your leave that you've accrued, it will help you get more time added on to your FERS annuity. It'll increase the amount of money that you receive, but what it will not do is add up to that 20 years of service. You actually have to have been there for 20 years to lock in your FERS annuity without any kind of reduction. So there's a 5% reduction for every year before that 20 years, before the 20 years of time of pure federal service. So for each year that for each year that you haven't received, that you haven't worked the 20 years. So in his case, for 4 years he was looking at, then he'd take a 5% reduction in his annuity for those each of those 4 years. So so about a 20% reduction in his annuity. And that being said, well, if you take that, it is locked in and you can't get that back. You cannot go back and change that once you've retired.
I didn't know that.
Yes. Some people, like I said, this is where with law enforcement individuals in the federal government, things can get a little complicated, a little more complicated for them
Oh yeah.
because of the requirements set forth by the federal government.
Well, that's why they need somebody like you, right?
Yes, sir. That's what we hope to do.
So let's and we get this question a lot. So let's switch gears to the thrift savings plan. Can somebody access that account before 59 and a half if they're an LEO and their mandatory retirement is 57? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We have that is actually something that we're asked a lot, and because federal federal law enforcement have to are required to retire at 57 or as soon as they get that 20 years. But there's usually there's about 5 years there. And I would say 5 years. There's about 2 years there, 2.5 years actually, to where before you get 59 and a half. And when you retire from the federal government, you are able to move money from your TSP. Say you want to move it to something, say if a private plan, or you get another
IRA.
job. If you get another job, you can move that into a 401k. However, you still are unable to access those funds without taking the 10% tax penalty of using the funds before 59 and a half. And that's where law enforcement individuals kind of get confused with that, because you would assume that if they're going to require you to retire before 59 and a half, they would give you access to those funds. However, they do not.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's an important discussion that everybody attending this needs to have with somebody like Joseph. I was not aware of that.
Yes, sir. It tends to be a few of those pitfalls that we find, and that's where, like with the last discussion we had about the supplemental annuity, kind of
Yes.
comes into play.
Yep.
And so that kind of all wraps up into one one big ball of confusion for people sometimes, and we try to hope to shed light on that, and to give them the best opportunities and the best financial advice for their retirement.
Yeah. So you offer, we do this nationally, but you specifically offer a free consultation, correct?
Yes, I do.
So that takes them through their pension. It addresses these LEO service questions. They can see a report on their specific start dates, different retirement ages, how to use the TSP. If somebody wants to take advantage of that, how they get a hold of you? You have an 800 number, right?
Yes, sir. My 800 number is going to be 866-419-2263, and my extension is going to be 702.
So 866-419-2263, extension 702. Joseph's located in Louisiana, but serving law enforcement officers nationwide. And we think it's important for each of you to have these special provisions, to work with somebody who understands your benefits. And Joseph, in a previous episode, we discussed this, but is a former law enforcement officer, so he gets it. Also, we offer through Fed Resource, you can go to landing page that has great information on it, fedchecklist.com, fedchecklist.com. And there are 12 must ask questions that you need to address before retiring as a federal employee on there. You need to look at those and think through them. You can put questions or comments for Joseph on there. We'll get them to him and his team. And you can download a retirement report that has a workbook for you and a budget. Great information there. So check it out. And Joseph, great information today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me. We appreciate it.
And we'll be back. We'll be back next week. We're going to get into the thrift savings plan and some of the considerations on withdrawing, and also whether a Roth contribution makes sense and how that impacts your taxes. So join us next week for that. And this concludes our session today. Thank you. And we look forward to talking to each of you soon.